Testing, you hear me now? Okay. Good morning and welcome, everyone. My name is Mike Waguespack. I'm your Louisiana legislative auditor. In we're about to go into our workshop. This will be our fourth and final. We've had three very successful workshops previously, I think two in person and another one we conducted Zoom earlier in the year. So we look forward to educating you and discussing with you and handling any questions you may have concerning the review of the 2023 setting of millage rates book. It's kind of a long explanation of what we do to adopt the millages, and as far as the process is concerned, the reassessment and the open meetings law. We have our legal advisors here, as well as whomever you need from the trusted advisory section of the legislative auditor. Well, I know the portal has been working well. I understand that many of you guys have been successfully loading up documents, and we're just applauded and tickled that that's working well. So we're going to start now. I think Ms. Joanne is ready to kick off this presentation, as well as Patrick will provide some legal advisory work. And again, you know, the bottom line is we do this to better educate you guys so that we can make a better allow the assessment process to work better and be successful to you stakeholders at the local level. And again, please know that our office is always open. We want to portray ourselves as a trusted advisor to all local governments. So please reach out anytime you need anything. Our doors are always open. Again, Mike Waguespack, it's a pleasure to be your auditor. I have embarked upon my second anniversary in this position, and I want to thank you for your support and look forward to many years of service to you. So with that said, Joanne, go ahead and crank it up. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well this morning. It's kind of a rainy day here in South Louisiana, but we made it in, and we'll make it through the day, and tomorrow the sunshine will come out. Thank you so much for participating in the 2023 millage workshops. Like Mr. Waguespack said, this year we were happy to offer 4 workshops, this being the 4th one. There were 2 held virtually, this again being the 2nd one, and then 2 held in person. So our in-person workshops were in West Monroe. So I'd like to thank the Ouachita Parish Assessor's Office for hosting that one. And then we held one here in East Baton Rouge. Great turnouts at both of those in-person workshops, as the same with the virtual workshops. There were no changes to the Constitution or the revised statutes that will affect this year's millage adoption. However, there are some procedural changes that will affect the way you submit your documentation to the assessor. Also, I want to remind you that the legislature is currently in session. That started April the 10th and will go through June the 8th. As of today, I'm not aware of anything that will affect the millage adoption process. I believe there are some bills going through that might affect the open meetings law, but again, we're not going to go over those until they're actually enacted by the legislature. I would also like to take this time and thank everyone that helped put the workshop together. It is definitely much a group effort. Mr. Waguespack, he's the man in charge, so he has to approve all of this. And Jennifer Shea, who is the general counsel here at the Legislative Auditor's Office, tax review is under the legal division, so Jennifer is the director of my division. Patrick Virgadamo, who's one of our senior attorneys, he'll be here in a little bit to discuss the open meetings law with you. He's very knowledgeable about that and will go into great detail about the open meetings law, which you want to keep in mind affects every one of your public meetings. I'd also like to thank Pam Mixon, Craig Wiseman, and Lizzie Shake-Snyder. They're vital in putting this stuff together. They get the presentation ready. They do the technical side of it. And even now they're in the room with me, just making sure of any glitches that may come up, we can address those as soon as possible. Going on, I do want to tell you that there is no continuing educational credit from the Legislative Auditor's Office, but your office or your agency may offer that. So if you need a confirmation that you participated in today's workshop, You need to be logged in individually. Don't log in as a group. You need to be logged in individually and remain logged in for the entire time of the workshop. As we go through the PowerPoint today, you're going to see that it's a little different than it has been in the past. So you'll need to follow along in your setting millage rates book. The PowerPoint is just an outline. It doesn't go into as much detail as the setting millage rate does, the setting millage rate book. If you have not already printed or downloaded that book, I'll please ask you to do that right now. Take a few minutes and do that. It's at the same location as where you registered for today's workshop. If you do have your setting millage rates book, you'll see that some of the information in that book is repeated. The book is designed so that the user does not have to flip back and forth from one section to the other. Once the taxing district has decided what action they're going to take on their millage rates in a particular year, are they going to roll forward or are they not going to roll forward? That taxing district only needs to go to that one section. So with that, we'll go ahead and get moving. I just want to point out that the PowerPoint or the setting millage rates book, neither one of those are all inclusive. It's up to the taxing districts to seek guidance from their general counsel, from their attorney, if they have questions on a specific issue that's not covered in the setting millage rates book or specific issue that comes up with their taxing district. As we move through the presentation today, please submit your questions that may come up as we go along. If we're on a specific topic, there should be a chat box that you can submit those questions, and we'll try to stop periodically and answer those questions. But if not, we'll catch up with those at the end. We will be taking a break after Patrick talks about the open meetings law, so we'll answer questions at that time, and then we'll also catch up with questions at the end of the presentation if we haven't answered those already. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and get started with what you're actually here for, is the discussion of the setting millage rates. And the first thing we're going to start off with are the definitions, and that is found on page 3 of your setting millage rates book. Now these definitions, there's other definitions out there, but these are just some of the terms that come up more often in the millage adoption process. We've gone over these every year, but I just feel like it's important to refresh your memory, refresh the meaning of these definitions. The actual levy, which is also known as the authorized rate, that's the millage rate that the taxing district adopts annually. It's the millage rate levied and collected in a particular year. So you are required to adopt your millage rates annually. And once you adopt them in a public meeting, this is the rate that will go on the tax rolls and then go and eventually make its way to the tax bills. The next term is ad valorem, and that just means according to value. Taxes are assessed according to a dollar amount calculated toward the property values. The next two terms we're going to go over are the adjusted maximum millage rate and the maximum authorized millage. The adjusted maximum millage is the maximum authorized millage as adjusted by reassessment. If the actual levy and the maximum authorized levy are different, both rates are going to be adjusted at reassessment. And this is something you may want to highlight, is any rate up to and including the adjusted maximum millage rate can be levied without going through the roll forward process. So any taxing district, when there is an increase in property values, can levy any rate up to the adjusted maximum millage without going through the roll forward process. The adjusted maximum millage rate is going to be a lower rate. You might want to make a note of that. When there is an increase in property value, the adjusted maximum millage rate will be lower to generate the same revenue as the prior year. So that is the adjusted maximum millage. It is the lower rate. The maximum authorized levy is the millage rate that may be levied after the voters have approved it, but before reassessment occurs, because it's still considered a new tax. So it's the millage rate approved by the voters before it goes through reassessment. That can be levied. That is the maximum authorized levy. And then it's also the millage rate as adjusted by reassessment if there is a decrease in property value. if there's a decrease in property value, typically the adjusted maximum millage rate and the maximum authorized levy are going to be the same rate, and that will generate the same revenue as the prior year. And then it's the maximum authorized levy is also the prior year's maximum after reassessment if there is an increase in property values. So if there is an increase in property value, your prior year's maximum is also known as the maximum authorized millage. And then the last thing, and you may want to highlight that, is the prior year's maximum, which we just said is the maximum authorized millage, will only be available until the next reassessment occurs. So by law, you have until the next reassessment to levy that maximum authorized millage when there is an increase in property values. So of the adjusted maximum millage and the maximum authorized millage, the maximum authorized millage will be higher when there is an increase in property value. And that will take rolling forward to levy that. So you will roll forward to any rate over the adjusted maximum up to the maximum authorized millage if the district chooses to do so. The next definition we're going to go over is on page 4 of your setting millage rates book. It is the prosse verbal. It's a detailed written report of a proceeding or an election. So if you have an election, by law, you are required to create a document called the prosse verbal. Now, I want to make a note, and we'll touch on this again in the laws. The elections are under the authority of the Secretary of State's office. So therefore, the prosse verbals are under the authority of the Secretary of State's office. We put that information in here simply because we need accurate information once you have a new or renewed tax. So we just add this information for informational purposes, because again, any questions would be directed to the Secretary of State's office. Reassessment is also known as reappraisal. A reassessment is the process mandated by the Louisiana Constitution to revalue all property subject to taxation within the state. Reassessment will adjust the millage rates either upward or downward, depending on those property values. And the purpose of it is to keep the revenue for a taxing district the same as the preceding year. So that is the goal of reassessment, is to maintain revenue for the taxing districts. And one thing you may want to highlight is bonds are not subject to reassessment. General obligation bonds, which you'll see when we go into the next section, that general obligation bonds are not subject to reassessment. And then the last definition we'll go over is the roll forward. Roll forward is when you're going to increase the millage rate after reassessment from the adjusted maximum millage, which we just discussed is the lower rate, up to a rate not in excess of the prior year's maximum, which we just discussed is also known as the maximum authorized millage. Roll forward only occurs when there is an increase in property value and the taxing district wants to roll up and levy that higher rate to increase revenue. So you want to be, there are a lot of extra notice requirements when rolling forward, and we're going to get into those after the break this morning. The next section we're going to go over are the laws. Now these, again, these are just the more important laws, the laws that provide the notice requirements and the mandates, but there may be laws out there that's specific to your district. So that was something you would need to take up with your general counsel. Article 7, Section 18F of the Louisiana Constitution requires all properties subject to taxation to be reappraised at least once every 4 years. Now you want to highlight that at least once every 4 years. There are occasions and there are provisions that reassessment may possibly occur more often than every 4 years. There's provisions that the tax commission could call it, and there's also provisions that the assessors can call it. So again, you want to highlight at least once every 4 years. Now, Article 7, Section 18F is what mandates the adjustment of property values to be reappraised. Article 7, Section 23B, it mandates that using the property values that we just discussed, it mandates the adjustment of ad valorem taxes either upward or downward based off of those property values. So Article 7, Section 18F adjusts the property values. Article 7, Section 23B mandates the adjustment of the actual millage rates. Article 7, Section 23C authorizes millage rates, the increase in millage rates after reassessment, but not in excess of the prior year's maximum, which we just discussed is also known as the maximum authorized millage. This is known as rolling forward. This is the provision that authorizes local governments to increase their taxes by rolling forward. So it's Article 7, Section 23C of the state constitution. And then D states that reassessment does not apply to the millage rates levied toward general obligation bonds. So that's where that provision comes through. Article 7, Section 23D states that reassessment would not apply to general obligation bonds. And then we're going to move on to revised statute 47-1705A. But if you look on page 5 of your setting millage rates book, you'll see that revised statute 47-1705A and revised statute 11-1481 is the same information. It has the same language and everything, except that for 47-1705A excludes Orleans Parish, where revised statute 11-1481 does not. So Orleans Parish, by that statute, is required to follow the same procedures as the other taxing districts within the state. But what they say is that they require all tax recipient agencies of ad valorem taxes to adopt an ordinance or resolution each year. So that's annually, you're required to adopt an ordinance or resolution with the millage rates to be applied to the assessed value. Those adopted ordinances or resolutions are required to be submitted to the legislative auditor and to the parish assessor no later than June 1st and no later than September 1 for St. Charles Parish. So there's a few things in that language that we need to take a minute and discuss. The law does say legislative auditor and the parish assessor. We're asking you to submit it to the parish assessor. That way everyone stays in the loop as what millage documents have submitted when. And then with the new procedures that Mr. Waguespack spoke about, you'll see in a few minutes why we need you to submit those to the assessor. The assessor will now electronically scan all of the millage adoption documents and submit them through a portal on the legislative auditor's website. Now, the law does require the millage documents be submitted no later than June 1st. There are provisions that allow the assessor to waive that deadline. However, this is not a reassessment year. 2023 is not a reassessment year, as far as I know. You may want to check with your parish assessor, but I have not heard of any reassessment, special reassessment being called. So June 1st is a date that should be attainable. The millage rates are not going to change unless for some unknown reason reassessment occurs. So you have your millage rates, and June 1st should be an attainable date. If not, soon thereafter should be reasonable, attainable. Now, St. Charles Parish, they have until September 1st to submit their millage documents. I'm not sure why that is. The assessor went before the legislature and had that date changed. Now, in the typical, like I said, this year, you should be able to meet the June 1st deadline. However, in the year of reassessment, it's difficult to meet that deadline. So typically the assessors will waive the June 1st deadline because your millage rates will be adjusted in reassessment. So you have to wait until that occurs before you know what rates you're actually going to be able to adopt. Then we're going to skip down to revised statute 47-1705B. This is the statute that authorizes the increase in millage rates after reassessment to not exceeding the prior year's maximum. It also sets forth additional notice requirements when you're going to increase those millage rates. This is known as rolling forward. Revised statute 47-1705B provides the notice requirements for rolling forward. And then revised statute 47-1705.1. The provisions of this section shall apply to any parish with a population of 245,000 and 265,000 according to the federal census. Now, if you've had your book printed for a while, there was an error on this page. I need you to correct those population amounts. It should be 245,000 to 265,000, according to the latest census. The first books that we had put out on the website had that error in it. So if you've had your book for a while, we need you to make that correction to 245,000 to 265,000. On page 6 of your setting millage rates book, it provides revised statute 47-1705.1B. So 1705.1A provides the population. 1705.1B provides what must be done to meet those guidelines if your parish falls within those populations. It requires public hearings and public meetings of all non-elected taxing authorities within that population bracket, if your parish falls within that population, which are subject to those provisions of 47-1705.1A. It requires that those non-elected taxing authorities, with respect to increasing the millage rates without further voter approval, so that states that's the roll forward. If they are going to increase millage rates without further voter approval, that is part of the roll forward procedures. Those non-elected taxing authorities are required to hold their usual, their public hearings and everything. They're required to coordinate that with the parish authority. If they're going to roll forward, a non-elected board is required to coordinate their public meetings and public hearings with the parish governing authority if they fall within that population bracket. This includes meetings at which a vote is to be taken on the proposed millage rate increase, and it's also includes the public hearings. Now, the parish governing authority is required to schedule the dates, a date that is accommodating for everyone. They will schedule the public hearing and public meeting, those dates for that, and then taxing districts will, have an option on what dates they would want to go to the parish governing authority and have their roll forward procedures. Revised statute 47-1993 This brings municipalities onto into the procedures and everything. They still have to follow the procedures 47-1705B, but it also says that those that prepare their own tax rolls and assessment list, upon approval of those lists by the parish governing authority, they're also required to submit that information to the tax commission and the legislative auditor. Now, these next few slides are related to the open meetings law, revised statute 42-11-28. That is the open meetings law. And then revised statute 44-36F. It also talks about part of the open meetings law and recordations and all that. So Patrick Virgadamo will come in a little bit and go over the open meetings law. So we're going to skip those statutes so that he will go into detail with those with you a little bit later. So if you'll turn to page 7 of your setting millage rates book, the next statute we're going to go over is revised statute 18, section 1285. It provides that notice of an election be given. So if you're going out for an election, you are required by this statute to give notice of that election. If the notice is relative to an election which affects ad valorem taxes, the notice shall also state that a portion of the monies collected shall be remitted to certain state and statewide retirement systems. Now, again, as I stated before, the Secretary of State's office is in charge of all elections. These sites are included in here just because the LLA needs accurate information after your tax gets voter approval. So we put this information in the book so you are aware of it. You can talk to your bonding attorney about it, or if your district does their own elections, you want to be sure that you're checking these sites. Revised statute 18-1293. It provides that the governing authority ordering the election shall preserve a proce verbal. So there's that word that we learned about in the definitions, proce verbal, which again is a written report with information pertaining to the election. If the election affects ad valorem taxes, the governing authority You should include in that pro se verbal a notice of the election and proof of publication. So you're required to put the notice of election and proof of publication in your pro se verbal. Then once the pro se verbal has been created, the governing authority shall forward that, and shall means must, to be copied to the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State will record it and have a recordation page attached to the final pro se verbal. You should also have it recorded in your parish clerk of court's office in the mortgage records. Article 6, Section 33B of the Louisiana Constitution, it applies to the payment of general obligation bonds. Any bond issued to a taxing district under the Constitution or the statute pursuant to which they are issued, you are required to levy and collect, or cause to be levied and collected, a tax, an ad valorem tax sufficient to pay that debt, to service that debt in 1 year. It goes on to say, all taxable property in the political subdivision ad valorem tax is sufficient to pay principal and interest on such bonds as they mature. So that right there, by saying as they mature, means that you should be recalculating these bond rates as you go forward with your repayment schedule. You need to look at that payment annually, look at the property values, and calculate the rate that would generate enough revenue to service that debt for 1 year. Revised Statute 13, Section 5565. That requires the sheriff or the tax collector to deduct the amount certified by the legislative auditor pursuant to Revised Statute 24.513.0, which is the previous statute, and remit that money to the appropriate retirement systems. Now, Revised Statute 24.513.0, it requires the legislative auditor's office to annually review, calculate, and certify the amounts due to each one of those public retirement systems. It also requires that the legislative auditor submit a report to each sheriff or tax collector with those amounts on there. So those reports are available on our website. We do those annually after all of the tax rolls have been certified by the Tax Commission. State law requires us to use that certified tax roll to create those pension reports. And like I said, they are on our website, so you can go out there and look at the one for your parish if you'd like to. The next thing we're going to go over are the Attorney General opinions. Now, these are the same opinions that we've had for a while now. They just provide important information on particular topics in the millage adoption process. So it's good to refresh your memory that the opinions are out there. The AG may even have an opinion pertaining to one of your questions that's specific to your district. So the website is on the screen now if you wanted to jot that down and go out there and search the AG's website for a particular opinion. The first opinion we're going to go over is AG opinion number 89-526. It states reassessment can be done in any year to compensate for decreases of assessed value of public service and personal property. So this is one of the provisions that we discussed earlier. This is where the assessors have the authority to call reassessment when there is a decrease in property value, and they need to raise that rate so that the taxing district will not lose revenue because of a decrease in property values. Generally, what happens is the assessors will talk to the districts that are affected by that decrease and determine if they want to go ahead and submit reassessment in that year or if they can wait until the statewide reassessment occurs. And generally, I find that larger districts such as school boards or parish councils, some of their taxes, they can usually wait until the statewide reassessment. However, smaller districts like fire protection districts or drainage districts, they may not be able to wait. They may need that revenue to stay as high as it was the prior year. AG opinion number 06-0107 states that reassessment cannot be done to compensate for value loss in real estate due to the transfer of property to the exempt tax roll. So if there are properties already on the active roll and the parish decides to move it to the tax exempt roll, the AG has opined that that is not reason to do reassessment. He went on to say that if that taxing district has not already rolled forward, that they still had that option to do so prior to the next reassessment. AG opinion number 93-339. This just goes on to explain that term adjusted millage rate and the prior year's maximum, when it began and what it refers to. AG opinion number 00245 and 245A. This states that the taxing authority may roll forward at any year prior to the next reassessment. And it goes on to explain the definition of the prior year's reassessment. Now, this next AG opinion, I need you to mark a note beside it. It's AG opinion number 08-257. I kept this in the book, and I probably will take it out after this year since I'm giving you this information. AG opinion number 08-257. It includes provisions for a subsequent public hearing and public meeting. It came about back years ago whenever there were a lot of hurricanes coming through the state. Taxing districts would advertise to roll forward, advertise for their public hearing, advertise for their public meeting. And then, the hurricane came through, so they were not able to hold those scheduled public hearings and public meetings. And so the AG opined and gave provisions for subsequent hearings and subsequent meetings. But since that time, the legislature has actually added it to revised statute 47-1705B. So now you will follow those provisions. You'll no longer follow the AG's opinion. So you might want to make a note right there beside that opinion. You should now be following revised statute 47-1705B, which does include provisions for subsequent hearings and subsequent meetings. And we'll go over those details in the roll forward section. And then AG opinion number 10-0030. There was some confusion back, in 2010 and about, does Orleans Parish have to follow the same requirements as the rest of the state? So the AG provided that the provisions contained in revised statute 47-1705B through D do also apply to Orleans Parish. And those statutes B through D provide the additional requirements for rolling forward. So Orleans Parish does have to do that. Now, there are other AG opinions out there that affect elections, terminology used in your pro se verb out and your proposition that's on your pro se verb out. So I do encourage you, if you have questions specific to your taxing district, to search the AG's website. They may have already written an opinion on that. So the next thing we're going to go over is the open meetings law. And Patrick Virgadamo, like I said, he is a senior attorney here with the office. He's going to present the information on the open meetings law to you. In his capacity here at the Legislative Auditor's Office, Patrick does phenomenal work. He researches and writes opinions on numerous topics and various questions that come through. He helps the state and local officials. You may have even talked to Patrick if you have ever been referred to our legal division with a question. Public entities reach out to him when they have a topic that arises and they need some additional information. So again, he has extensive knowledge on the open meetings law. So if you have any questions specific to the open meetings law, I do encourage you to put those in the chat box and he'll be happy to answer those before we go on break. All right, Patrick.
Thanks, Joanne. Welcome, everybody. Today, we're going to spend a few minutes doing a quick view of the open meetings law. We have a lot of guidance out there on our website if you really need more information on this. And we'll try to use this in the context of what you guys are likely going to be using the open meetings law, which Joanne will go into some specifics later about those processes for setting your millage and rolling forward. But it's good to know that the way you do that is through open meetings. And so we want to kind of give you at least a base, make sure you have a base knowledge on that and some information. And if you ever have questions, like Joanne said, reach out to us. We're always happy to help. If we don't know the answer, we like to try to at least get you to someone who can get you your answer. So today, we'll start off with, I think anytime we talk about the open meetings law, the first thing we have to talk about is the Louisiana Constitution. Article 12, Section 3 of the Constitution specifically provides that no person shall be denied the right to observe the deliberation of public bodies and examine public documents except in cases established by law. This is the foundation of the open meetings law and the public records law, which you'll often hear the term sunshine laws. And the idea of that comes from a former U.S. Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis in an article in the 1920s, I believe it was. One of the things he was quoted as saying is sunshine is said to be the best disinfectant. The idea that when public business happens in the sunshine and out in the open, corruption and those things tend to take a backseat and don't happen. So with that in mind, let's talk about some of the major aspects of the open meetings law. The first statute you'll have on your slides you see is RS 42:12. What section 12, the thing to kind of get from that is it provides that the provisions of the open meetings law shall be construed liberally in favor of allowing public observation of public business. The thing to take away from this is if there's a 50-50 question whether or not something should be allowed or not allowed to be out in front of the public, the courts are going to err on the side of the public being able to watch this. So when you get into situations of, say, executive sessions, what this means is the courts are going to strictly construe the requirements to be able to go into executive session and exclude the public. If you don't meet all of the requirements, they're going to basically say you have to have it in public. Now, RS 42:13, section 13 gives us some very important definitions. The first one is public body. A public body, the way to think about this is essentially is your legislative branch of that government. So it's going to be your board of aldermen. It's going to be your city town council. It's going to be your parish governing authority. It's going to be the police jury or police parish council. It's going to be school boards. It's going to be your levy boards and port commissioners. It's going to be the board of a special district commissioner authorities and the committees or subcommittees of these bodies. What it doesn't include is your executive side. So on a city, the mayor and his or her meeting with department heads, those are not subject to open meetings. It's when the action of the body, the board of aldermen, the police jury, parish council, when they take action, which is going to be important for a millage because those are the people who meet to set the millage or roll forward. Now, committees and subcommittees, this gets people in trouble a lot. If it's established as a committee where it's, because people have this question, they say, well, what happens if we have a 7-member board, but then we have 3 people that are on this committee? Well, you have 4 people make up that board, a quorum of the board, but you only need 2 people for a quorum of the committee. They're separate. That committee has its own obligations to do minutes, to do agendas, everything that the body has to do, those committees have to do it as well. Now, meetings, this is the one that I think in its simplest terms, it's going to be a gathering of a quorum of that public body where they're either taking action or doing something where they're deliberating or taking action on something that's in their jurisdiction, or, and this is the one that catches people, receiving information regarding things under their jurisdiction. So if you have an in-service where you're teaching members how to do their job, that is an open meeting because they are receiving information how to do their job. It's different, however, if say they're going to a conference. At a conference, it is not specific to that entity. They're getting general knowledge. So it doesn't matter if there's a quorum or not. The caveat being in the breaks, don't get a quorum of the board together and start talking shop after you have a meeting or you have a session at a conference. Now, it does not include chance meetings or social gatherings where no voter action is taken or where they don't receive information and no formal information or informal polling occurs. So for instance, Louisiana, we love our festivals. Just because a quorum of the board all happens to be at the local festival doesn't make that an open meeting. However, if they start talking about business while they're there, and please don't be that person, then you get into problems because you have to make sure you meet all of the requirements for that to have that meeting. Now, quorum, this is one of the ones where it's usually talked about 50% plus one, but in its simplest terms, it is a simple majority of the membership of the body. So for example, if you have a 5-member board, 3 people are going to be a quorum. However, that is the general definition. Your specific statutes can provide for a different quorum. For instance, large regional commissions and things that usually don't have taxing authority and actual taking action, where they just recommend stuff, they may actually have a lower quorum just because that many people getting together may be a problem. You may also get situations where there's a compound requirement of quorum, where you have to have so many people, and of that, so many have to be something else. So you always want to look at your specific provisions to see what your quorum is defined. The biggest thing to understand with quorum, though, is positions count even if they're vacant. So if you have a 7-member board, you need 4 people for a quorum. It doesn't matter if 4 of those positions are vacant. It doesn't reduce what you need to do to meet. In fact, it's important to fill those vacancies, because if you get where you can't actually get a quorum, you can't even meet to fill those vacancies, and which means you'll have to get with the governor to get those filled. So you always want to be aware that your quorum doesn't change just because there's a vacancy in a position. Now, the final thing, which isn't in the statute itself, but has been the AG's kind of interpretation, is a thing called the walking quorum, and you want to avoid those at all costs. Essentially, the simplest explanation of what a walking quorum is: you have council member A. Council member A goes to see council member B and says, "Hey, look, I'm thinking about putting this ordinance up, but before I bring it, I'd like to know, do I have your support?" They talk about it. Council member A leaves the meeting knowing council member B is going to support him. Council member A now goes to council member C and says, "Hey, look, I talked to council member B. This is what I'm thinking about doing, but I don't want to do it if I don't have your support. Council member B is on board. Are you on board?" And so they rinse and repeat that until, even though at no one point is a quorum physically present, they have constructively had a quorum meet and deliberate on something outside the public's view. And the AG says you can't do that. That violates the very spirit of the open meetings law, is that the public should be able to see that deliberation, and you can't take steps to subvert that. And so you always want to be careful not to have those walking quorums. Don't do informal things. And in fact, the AG says that's actually one of the worst things, is because if you never bring it up for discussion, the public never even gets to have the benefit of that discussion and know that that's an issue and weigh in on it. So you want to make sure, put things on an agenda, take them up, and have those deliberations in an open meeting. Now, section 42:14 basically gives some specific edicts of the open meetings law. First and foremost is meetings have to be open. So they have to be open in the public unless they are specifically authorized to close it, which is going to be usually your executive sessions and those specific circumstances. But the idea is the public, again, because the Constitution says, has a right to observe those deliberations. Now, voting, this is one the AG has interpreted this provision. Members have to be physically present to vote, unless you're operating under a virtual meeting exception. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Votes must be cast orally or electronically through some kind of mechanism that displays how you're voting. So it shouldn't just be oral votes. There should be a recordation, and Joanne will talk about that later, but the processes for establishing millages and rolling forward, because you need to make sure you have a recordation of those votes, because you need to know that you had enough people voting to do what they're saying they're trying to do. Now, the proxy voting is not allowed unless the law specifically provides it. Generally speaking, the law will say something like public official or his or her designee, which basically is saying you can send someone else. If it doesn't authorize you to do that, then only that person can vote. There was actually a recent AG opinion where the homeowners association also was one of those neighborhood improvement crime prevention districts. The HOA in their rules allowed for proxying. So their question was, well, can those proxies, since the law doesn't say one way or the other for when we're operating as the governing authority of the district, can they also still do a proxy? And the AG is like, no. The statute has to authorize you to have a proxy. If it doesn't, the general rule in the open meetings is you can't do it. So while you can do it as you're operating as the HOA, when you're acting as the district, no. The AG has made it clear you can't use secret balloting or straw polling. The idea is you can't do things to circumvent the discussion and vote in the public's view. In fact, the AG has specifically cautioned members that during a meeting, you should not be texting each other or other people about what's going on in the meeting. Because the idea is that unless you have some way, kind of like the old teachers thing, do you have something to show everybody else in the class? Unless you have something to show what you're talking about during the meeting, those discussions on that agenda item should be where the public can actually hear. And that opinion, in case anybody's curious, was 14-0140, where the AG said, do not text each other or other people about what's going on in the meeting, instead of having that open deliberation to the public. Now, public participation and commenting, this is the easiest thing people violate. Public bodies, except school boards, must afford opportunity for public comment before taking action during the meeting. What that means is it can be at one point in the meeting. But it has to be at the beginning of the meeting. You can't wait till do everything and then say, okay, now what do you want to say? I always tell people, one caution is if you do have a single period of public commenting at the beginning of a meeting, and we'll talk about it in a minute, where you maybe take action to add something to the agenda during the meeting, you need to make sure you give some more public commenting for that new agenda item because they wouldn't have had opportunity to speak on it before. School boards have to allow public commenting for each and every individual agenda item. They can't just have a single commenting period. Regular public bodies, again, can have a single period, or in some cases, they may do a period, but then for those agenda items, they may also, once again, say, does anyone have anything they want to add, and allow for public commenting. 42, section 17.1, this is the virtual meeting provision. And if you're one thing to take from the session, there's a lot of discussion on this, and I think it's going to be an ongoing topic now with things like Zoom, GoToMeeting, and other virtual things to try to potentially make it less onerous so you can have some virtual meetings for public entities. It's an exception to the open meetings law, which means it has to be strictly construed, which means if you don't meet all the requirements for it, you can't use it. And right now, the biggest reason no one should be using it is because it requires a governor declared disaster that, because of that disaster, makes it unable to health, safety, and welfare of the public and the body to meet under the normal open meetings rules. Right now, there is no statewide executive order. A parish or municipal declaration is not sufficient. The law requires it to be one by the governor. So now, during hurricane season, you may get a situation where your area, if you're under a declaration, you might be able to use this, but I always tell people, be mindful, it's strictly construed. And if you can meet, then you should meet. But you have to meet all the requirements. Now, those requirements require that the governor declare a state of emergency or disaster involving a geographic area. Under COVID, that was easy because it was a statewide declaration. The other next part that has to also be there is the nature of the emergency or disaster has to cause a meeting under normal rules to be detrimental to health, safety, and welfare. Classic example under COVID was you couldn't get everybody together because social distancing. Under a hurricane, it may be our building is destroyed, so we don't have a place to meet, so we have to meet disparately, but still conduct public business. The presiding officer also has to certify there's an extra certification notice that has to go in addition to the notice and agenda that we'll talk about in a minute, that all of the agenda items are limited to one or more of the following four things. First, matters directly related to the public body's response to the disaster that are critical to health, safety, and welfare of the public. Two, matters that if delayed will cause stoppage of vital public services or severe economic dislocation or hardship. Three, matters that are critical to the continuation of the public body and can't be postponed until a regular normal meeting because of some legal requirement. Federal guidelines say you have to have this in by this certain time. Our state law says that isn't suspended, says you have to do this by a certain date. So those are things that you can meet. The fourth one was one that was added after the fact, and basically it said, look, if there are other matters that are critical or time sensitive, and the presiding officer says, we don't necessarily have a hard deadline, but we need to go ahead and take care of that now. It allows those to be added, but it requires 2/3 of the members present to agree to take those up before they can actually take them up in the meeting. So they're not automatically on the agenda. They're just conditional on the agenda, and 2/3 have to vote on the record to say, yeah, we agree. We shouldn't wait on this. Let's take it up. But you have to have it on the agenda so that the public knows that you may take it up. Now, if a quorum is physically able to meet, the AG has said there can be a hybrid of those things when the situations, but I think the question is going to be, if you can meet under the regular rules, the statute says that's one of the requirements, is that meeting under the normal rules would be detrimental to health, safety, and welfare. Now, there are some special rules for these meetings. The public body, no later than 24 hours before the meeting, excluding weekends and holidays, has to provide notice and agenda, which we'll talk about what those are in normal rules. But they also have to give detailed information on how the public can participate. So the Zoom link, whatever they need to do to join, and how they can submit comments both before and during the meeting on those agenda items. It has to be posted on the public body's website. The idea is if you can have a virtual meeting, you're likely going to have a website. You have to provide the media who request notice, which is under the normal rules we'll talk about. And you have to distribute it to widely distributed news media outlets that broadcast or publish within your geographic area of your jurisdiction. So your newspapers, your radio stations, your TV stations, those are the ones that you need to make sure know about your virtual meeting. Now, the public entity has to have a mechanism so that they can receive public comment both prior to and during the meeting. So that's why you saw a lot of people adopting things like Zoom, because you could raise your hand, they could be called on, give information, things of that sort. You also have to have ability to properly identify and acknowledge public comments during the meeting and maintain those in your meeting minutes. For example, anybody who watched the legislature during the pandemic knows they would say, okay, I need to read these into the record. And so there would be things they would read into the record and make sure they were part of it. The presiding officer themselves, which in the case of a municipality is usually going to be your mayor, has to ensure that each person participating is properly identified and that all parts of the meeting, except those things that are excluded under, say, executive session, are clear and audible to everybody. So the idea is if you're operating under a virtual meeting and you have technical difficulties, you can't keep going. If you know the public can't see, you need to make sure that if you're going to do it, the public has to be able to access it. Now, 4219, this is back to our normal rules, and this is what we're all operating under now. It provides that notice and agenda has to be posted. Now, this is the thing where people get confused on this. If you have regularly scheduled meetings that are identified, that are either by the statute, by an ordinance, or by your rules, say we're going to meet, say, the third Wednesday of every month. At the beginning of the calendar year, you're supposed to put a notice out saying, here is the meeting schedule for this calendar year of our regular meetings. You'll see that school boards and police juries and municipalities do that all the time at the beginning of the year. That is one notice. Now, the more common notice that everyone has, whether they have regularly scheduled meetings or not, there's the individual meeting notices. Those, you have a couple options on how those can be posted. First and foremost, those have to be posted at least 24 hours, again, excluding weekends and holidays. So if you have a Monday meeting, Thursday is when you really need to make sure you have everything posted. You also want to make sure that that notice is posted, and you have a couple options. Either you can post it at your principal office of your public body. If you don't have a principal office, and sometimes boards and commissions or special districts, you may not have an office per se, then it's where you meet at. You want to post that outside, or you can publish it in your official journal. And notice that's an or. You don't have to do both. It's physical posting or posting in your journal. Now, if you have a website, you have to post that notice on your website in addition to whether you physically post it or post it in your journal. And you have to email a copy to news media that request notice. What I always suggest people is set up a mail list. Just say, look, when we're going to post something, here's the media that have asked to be notified of this. I just sent out an email with the notice and agenda saying, here's the meeting. Now, the notice has to include the date, time, and location of the meeting. When is it going to be? Where is it going to be? And what time is it going to be? And it has to include the agenda. Now, the agenda has to be somewhat descriptive. You can't just say, oh, no, old business, new business. You need to actually say, we're going to set our millage. We're going to roll forward. We're going to vote on this. It needs to be descriptive enough so that if you were reading an agenda, would I want to go to that meeting? Or would I know what they're going to take up? Now, each agenda item should be listed separately. So you should have an agenda item for each thing you're going to take up at that meeting. And you can't make changes within that 24-hour period. So once it's physically posted 24 hours before or in the paper, you can't make any changes. You can't add things. You can't take things off. However, once you get into your meeting, you can vote by unanimous vote of everyone present of the board. So if you're a municipality, the mayor doesn't vote, it's the board of aldermen. All of them have to vote to approve to add something to the agenda. If they agree that it should be in your minutes, the motion and the vote and what the agenda item is, they can add something. What the AG says, you can just table by a simple majority and say, look, we're not going to take that up. It was on the agenda, but we're not going to do it this week. But to add it, it takes that unanimous vote. Now, 4219.1 was added later. This is very important for taxing bodies because this requires an advance notice whenever you're going to take action to propose a new ad valorem tax or increase or renew an existing one. That's whether it's ad valorem or sales and use tax, where you're going to have to take it to the vote of the people. And the idea behind this is, in addition to the 24-hour notice, you have to, in a meeting, give notice of this and post notice at least 20, but not more than 60 days before that meeting. And the idea is, because taxes are such a big issue, there's this advance notice that we're going to take this action. Now, that each voting member, you also have to give, in addition to your normal media, each voting member of any governing authority that is required to approve tax-related things. So if you're a board or commission that requires any tax action you're going to take has to be also approved by, say, your parish council, those voting members of the parish council also have to get specifically an email or a letter within that 20 to 60 days in advance saying, we're going to take this up on that meeting. You also have to give that notice to your state senator and state representative if your jurisdictions even in partly within their district. The idea being, because taxes are a pretty heated thing in some cases, those elected officials need to know that that's taking place, so if they get questions, they understand what's going on. One thing to understand is, if you cancel or postpone the meeting, so you say, hey, 20 to 60 days in advance, you say, on this date, we're going to take this up. But then say the hurricane comes or whatever reason you cancel that meeting, you have 10 days to publish a new notice that says, we're going to have this meeting at least 10 days out. Now, there's a distinction, however, if you have the meeting but don't take up the actual agenda item, the law says you have to start over again. So 20 to 60 days, the time starts all over again to give notice to take that action. So be very careful if it's a tax thing where that's under 19.1, a distinction between not having the meeting and postponing the meeting, or having the meeting and just postponing action. That is an important distinction. Now, 4220 gives us our rules on minutes. Basically, that is, we had our meeting, we gave our notice, we took minutes to know what happened at the meeting. So written minutes of all meetings have to be kept. They are a public record. They must be available within a reasonable time. One of the things the AG has said is, you can't wait to the next meeting and say, well, they're not approved minutes, so we're not going to give them to you yet. His thing is, reasonable time means within a time for you to actually type them up. The fact that they haven't been approved is of no difference, because at the next meeting, usually one of the first agenda items is to approve the minutes. What the AG has said is, if there's a correction, those will be in the minutes for the next meeting. So you can't use the idea that, hey, look, we haven't met yet to approve these minutes, so I can't give them to you. This is especially important for like a special district who maybe only meets 4 times a year. That'd be a long time before you give them their minutes. And so you can't wait for that. Minutes aren't a verbatim transcript. They just need to be sufficiently descriptive so that you know what's going on. They should include the date, time, and location of the meeting, who was present, who was absent, the substance of matters, like what was the agenda item, what was the nature of what was being talked about. And if a member requests for something to be specifically put in there, what's in there, and what the actual votes were for those things, so that if there's a case of an ordinance or a resolution, you know how many people were there, so you know how many votes were needed to pass it, and that it shows enough votes passed. So you want that in your minutes. The easiest thing I tell people is, if you were looking at something and needed to know what happened 10 years ago, what are the things you would want to make sure are in the minutes when you're looking at it, so that you want to make sure that person 10 years from now has that same benefit. Minutes have to be, there's a publication of minutes. The open meetings law itself doesn't specifically require publication of minutes, except on your website if you have one. However, municipalities, so city councils, board of aldermen's, parish governing authorities, parish councils, police juries, and school boards. In Title 43, Section 144 specifically says you have to publish your minutes. You have to give them to your official journal within 20 days of their meeting. There's actually criminal prevention provisions if you don't do it. Everybody else, and this is why people are like, well, do we have to publish our minutes? Yes. Other political subdivisions, including special districts, are required to publish their minutes in their official journal under 43:171. 171, basically, it does not, however, say within a certain time. It's a reasonable time. What we have always told people is, if you get it within the 20 days that's required for a city, parish, or school board, it's going to be hard to argue that you weren't reasonable in getting it published. And so the idea is that within that 20 days gives you time to, no matter how often your official journal publishes, you can get it to them and then they publish it from there. Now, the open meetings law does say if you have a website, you have to post those minutes on your website within 10 days of them being published in your journal. And you have to keep 3 months up there. So you should have the latest one there plus the previous 2 months, and it rolls off after that. Some places they may keep it a year's worth. That's fine, but you have to keep at least 3 months worth according to the law. Now, it does provide if you have technical glitches. We've had questions sometimes where, hey, look, our websites, we're having issues. We can't post anything right now. Just post it when you can. The law makes it clear that it's not a violation if because of technical reasons you didn't get it up, just do it when you can. Now, 4223, this basically says that the public has a right to record meetings, except for executive sessions, obviously, because kick everybody out except who needs to be there. And it may be video or tape recorded. Now, the issue here, though, is the public body can put rules because nobody wants someone who says, well, hey, I'm recording a meeting standing up in front of everybody else so they can't see what's going on. So you can say, hey, look, you got to stand right here. A lot of times you'll see at a meeting on the dais, you'll see a bunch of recorders because that's the idea is that you can record it, but you can't keep someone else from being able to watch the meeting. Now, if you're a board that isn't elected, so you're all appointed and you can levy taxes, you yourself are required to record. And so that's one of the things that 4223 says is you have to record those meetings, whether it's video, audio recording, or having the local news station broadcast it. But it has to be recorded. Now, after that was passed, the neighborhood improvement and crime prevention districts, which again, we talked about earlier, a lot of them are run by the HOA. They were made exempt because they just didn't have the ability to record those things. Although now with Facebook Live and stuff, people do it anyway. So they have the recordings, but it doesn't require you to do it. One thing to note, those non-elected boards that have to record, there is a special provision in the in the public records law, which says you only have to keep those for 2 years. And so you don't have to keep those recordings for 3 years as you normally would. It's only 2 years. So violations of the open meetings law, any action that's in violation of the open meetings law requires somebody take legal action within 60 days of the violation. The idea is we're not going to go back 2 years and say, oh, you didn't do public commenting, and so it's null and void. I will caution you, there's a difference between the open meetings violation and a procedural violation for tax stuff, so be careful. But civil penalties can be up to $500 per violation if you have a willful violation. So if you knew better and did it anyway, they can charge you up to $500 personally, which means you're not indemnified. You have to pay it out of your own pocketbook for those violations. So it's always important people do the right thing. And if you have questions about it, ask. We do have a lot of guidance out there on the open meetings law. We have an FAQ. We have some videos that talk about certain aspects of the open meetings law, as well as a lot of frequently asked questions that we get where you can sort by open meetings law. So if you have those questions, maybe take a look at those. But if you still have a question, definitely reach out to us. We're always happy to help you. It's easier to help you before you do something than afterwards. So with that, I think if we have any questions, we'll be happy to take them up. But if not, I think we'll be having a break.
That's right. We're going to go ahead and take a break. If you have questions related to the open meetings law, please go ahead and submit those now. Patrick may hang out with us for a few more minutes and we can answer those when we get back from the break. We're going to take a 10-minute break. So if you will mark your clocks and alarm and come back in 10 minutes, we'll get started on the not rolling forward section of the book. But again, if you have questions related to the open meetings law, please go ahead and submit those now. Thank you. All right, we're back from the break. I hope everybody was able to take a breather, and we're back and we're going to get started right now. There is one question that came in on the open meetings law, and Patrick is still here, so we're going to let him take that.
Hi, everybody. So the question we had is, someone wanted to know, did I understand that committees and subcommittee meetings are subject to open meetings law? Yes, if they are a subcommittee or a committee of the legislative side of the board commission. So if the police jury has a committee, like a budget committee, those meetings are subject to open meetings, just like the police jury meetings are. Now, remember, say in a city or a police jury where you have an executive side, those department meetings or those committees that are on the executive committees are not subject to this. So it has to be a committee or a subcommittee of the legislative public body as it's defined in 4213. So it's got to be that board of aldermen, the police jury, some commission or commission, their committee or subcommittee. Now, that said, one of the things we see a lot is that for minutes, they'll notice those meetings, those committee meetings, but the minutes may be handled as a report within the minutes of the main body. So there's ways that can be done, but the committees and subcommittees are subject to open meetings. So if you have a quorum of the committee or subcommittee, it needs to be properly noticed, have an agenda and minutes taken of that meeting so that it's done just like it would be for the main body. And remember, the quorums are different, because the committee is made up of less people, so it's a different quorum. It's a quorum of a majority of whatever that official committee is. So if it's a 12-member board and you need 7 people to show up, if you have a committee that's only, say, 5 people, that committee only needs 3 people to do business. And so they are subject to it, but it is not as huge a thing as it is for the big body.
All right. Thank you, Patrick, for joining us today. Like I said, he knows a lot about the open meetings law. So if you do have any other questions about that, you can always reach out to Patrick, or any of our legal staff is more than happy to help you with that. We do have another question that came in. It says, if we have a tax with an authorized rate of 5.98 and a max mill of 6.04 that was renewed in 2021, can we levy the additional 0.06 mills without rolling forward? If yes, how do we go about doing so? And should it be done before the June 1st deadline? So without actually looking at the tax, without looking at the database, the record in the database, with the information that you provided, yes, you can. The authorized rate is simply the rate that was levied by the taxing district. And so you have until the next reassessment to levy the full voter approved amount. So again, without looking at the record, to be sure, just with the information that you provided, that, it sounds like, yes, you can levy that additional millage without rolling forward because it has not gone through reassessment yet. And then if yes, how do we go about doing that? Well, that's the next section that we're going to talk about. You're going to follow the not rolling forward section of the setting millage rates book. And yes, if at all possible, you should try to meet that June 1st deadline. That's something that you want to discuss with the assessor. If you feel like you're going to go past that June 1st deadline, they may have to waive that deadline for you. Okay, we have, I think that's all of the questions we have right now. One person said they're having connectivity issues due to a power outage during the break. So if it was just during the break and you're back on now, well, then you're right on time. You haven't missed anything. So we will go ahead and get started with the next section of the book. And that section is going to be the not rolling forward section. So to levy your millage rates, to get started with the process, I suggest that you contact the assessor in your parish just to be sure about reassessment, if reassessment is going to occur. If they say no, well, you have your millage rates in place already. So you can start your adoption process now. Today, you can start your process today. Once you do that, the taxing body, your board or your body needs to take a look at the millage rates that are available and the budget needs of the district to determine what millage rate will meet those needs and that's best for them to levy. This will decide what sections of the book you're going to look at, if you're going to not roll forward or if you are going to roll forward. That will help you decide, where to go to in the book so you don't have to keep flipping back and forth. First, we're going to talk about not rolling forward, the notice requirements when you are not going to roll forward. Some examples of who would use this book is any taxing district that has a new tax for the first year. A voter approved tax, you would follow this because new or renewed taxes are not subject to reassessment. You are authorized to levy any rate up to that voter approved amount until the tax goes through reassessment. If you want to levy a rate up to the adjusted maximum millage rate, that lower rate, you would follow this section. If there was a decrease in property value, you would follow the not rolling forward section. Or if you've already rolled forward, like in 1 year, if you rolled forward last year all the way to the max, you don't have to do that again. You only have to roll forward once within a reassessment cycle. Now, some taxing districts choose not to roll forward all the way and then follow up with the remainder available the following year. So you would have to do the roll forward requirements, but in both of those years. And then again, if you're going to levy a bond, remember we said that general obligation bonds are not subject to reassessment. So therefore they're not subject to the roll forward. So if you only have a general obligation bond, your district will follow the not rolling forward sections of the book. So the notice requirements, when a taxing district chooses not to roll forward, you simply have to follow the open meetings law, revised statute 4211 through 28. Patrick went over that in detail. We're on page 15 of your studying millage rates book, and you can see a lot of the requirements are listed there. The first part of it is just to reiterate things that Patrick had gone over with you. All public bodies shall give written public notice no less than 24 hours before that public meeting, excluding weekends and legal holidays. All votes by the members of the public body shall be by voice, and they must be entered into the minutes. You're prohibited from utilizing proxy voting, secret balloting, or any other means to circumvent the open meetings law. And the public bodies must allow that public comment period at any point in the meeting prior to the action being taken on that item. Like Patrick said, remember that school boards, they have their own set of rules pertaining to that. And I feel like school boards are aware of that, and they do that fairly well, I must say. And then remember, if the public meeting is being held by electronic means, there's additional notice requirements for that. As Patrick said, right now, no one should be holding an electronic public meeting because there is no state of emergency declared by the governor. It has to be declared by the governor. So at the bottom of page 15, the notice requirements whenever you are going to hold a public meeting in which you are not going to roll forward. Again, you have to give written public notice no less than 24 hours before that public meeting. It's exclusive of weekends and legal holidays. Be careful when you're posting your notices or publishing your notices. That written public notice shall include your full and complete agenda. You have to include your full agenda. That agenda shall not be changed less than 24 hours prior to the meeting, and each item should be listed separately with specificity. Now, going back to it should include your full meeting agenda. We want you to submit your full agenda that you have posted. For some reason, just this year, I've gotten a couple of phone calls. Why do we have to do that? Well, the law requires you to include your full agenda. I got a set of millage documents the other day that was from a school board, and it only had their millage adoption on it. And so I questioned that. Being a school board, typically they have at least, a couple pages for their agenda. And sure enough, this district did. So they had to resubmit their agenda and prove to me that it was actually posted when they said it was. On your notice, which is your complete full meeting agenda, it must include the date, time, and place of your public meeting. When you're not rolling forward that notice of public meeting, you can decide as the taxing district whether you want to post it at the principal office or at where the meeting is being held. Generally, those are one and the same. Or if you want to publish it in the official journal of your taxing district. Now, one thing you want to be careful of with that publishing it in the official journal, remember those newspapers have a publication deadline that you have to meet. So you can't submit it to the newspaper 24 hours prior to meet the requirement. You have to meet their publication deadline in order for it to have already run in the paper to meet that requirement. In addition to that posting or publishing of your full meeting agenda, you're also required to post that notice on your internet website if you have one. Additional items that agenda items that would occur during the actual meeting, the presiding officer must read aloud each agenda item before the action has been taken. The public must be allowed that public comment period, and the public body may adopt reasonable rules and restrictions. That's up to you as the taxing district to adopt those. I would make them available to any public that come to your meeting. So you want to have those clear so that people that are making the comment know if they're time limited or what their topics could be. You want to have those available. The Legislative Auditor's Office does not know your reasonable rules and restrictions. That's up to you, the taxing district, to adopt those and have them documented somewhere. On page 16, you'll see a list of general notice requirements. These are just housekeeping reminders, I guess. You want to be sure that your agenda is clear as to what the public body is doing in that public meeting. Action verbs are required whenever you are taking up your millage adoption. For some reason, we've gone back to seeing that word consider and discuss. That does not take action. That just implies that there is going to be some discussion related to the millage adoption. If your charter or your bylaws require you to use consider or discuss, you need to follow up with and adopt or and levy. So it would say consider millage rates and adopt millage rates, or consider and adopt. It can even be two different agenda items if you feel that would provide more clarity. One agenda item would be to discuss the millage adoption. Second agenda item would be to adopt the millage rate. So you want to provide exact action verbs as to what's being done on those millage rates. The date of posting and time of posting must be shown to provide evidence of when that agenda was actually posted, especially if it was the day before or within a few days before. You want to provide that time. If the agenda is published, you need to get a proof of publication from the newspaper telling us that it was published, and you will submit that with your millage documents. The Legislative Auditor, we ask that if you have letterhead stationery that you use that. It is not required. So do not, don't feel like you have to go out and order and pay for letterhead if you don't have it already. But if you are a larger district and you have that stationery, it does provide additional information to the reader of those agendas. Be sure that the name of the taxing district is clearly shown on that notice, and that the notice of public meeting does not have to be signed. However, it should include the name and contact of someone with the taxing district in case the reader needs additional information on that agenda. So again, when you're not rolling forward, all you have to do is follow the requirements of the open meetings law. The documents that you're going to use whenever not rolling forward. Now, the following documents, they should be submitted to the assessor, who will then electronically submit them to the legislative auditor. This is new procedures that we have developed with the assessors. We have designed a new portal to the assessor secured site that is on the legislative auditor's website. And so now the assessors will scan all of your millage documents and submit those documents electronically. It's up to the assessor's office to come up with procedures of getting the documents from the taxing district to the assessor's office. Right now, I think most assessors are having them still submitted with paper, which is great. But again, that's up to the assessors to develop those procedures. They do have to be submitted electronically, though, from the assessor to the legislative auditor's office. Only the assessors have access to those secured sites because it pertains to a lot of other information. So again, you need to get your millage documents to the assessor, who will then scan them and submit them through the electronic portal. The notices that you're going to submit is that notice of public meeting, which includes your full meeting agenda, one resolution or ordinance, an affidavit, and a notary data sheet. The requirements for the resolution, in this case, you're only going to use one resolution or one ordinance. Now, if your charter requires you to use an ordinance, please use an ordinance. Just be sure that the vote count is on that ordinance and we can clearly tell where the majority was. Otherwise, you're free to use a resolution. You're going to, on that resolution or ordinance, it requires a simple majority vote. When you're not rolling forward, it requires a simple majority vote of the members present. But remember, you have to have a quorum to even hold the meeting, and a quorum includes a vacant seat. Your resolution or ordinance must be signed by an authorized person. I've gotten this phone call a few times. Who are our authorized signers? Legislative auditor, we do not know who your authorized signers are. As the taxing district, you should have that documented somewhere in your office as to who's authorized to sign what documents and to do what type of work or procedures for you. Your resolution must show the date of the adoption, and that adoption date must correspond with the notice of public meeting, the date of your public meeting. Your resolution must include a complete vote count, which is yeas, nays, and abstained. Even if you have a unanimous vote in favor of the adoption, we still need you to put 0 or the word none beside the other options. This way we will know that every vote has been accounted for. We do not know how many seats make up your board or your council. So therefore, if you put zeros beside the other options, we will know that you have accounted for every option. Your resolution or ordinance, they must adopt specific millage rates. Then all millage rates can be adopted on or recorded on one resolution or ordinance if the vote count is the same. So be sure that you're paying close attention to that. And if the vote count is the same for all your millage adoptions, you can record it on one resolution or ordinance. If the vote count is different, of course, you'd have to use separate ones. The requirements for the affidavit. Now, the affidavit is a required document that is available on the legislative auditor's website. There also are samples of notices and samples of resolutions. However, the affidavit is not a sample. You are required to use the current affidavit that's on the legislative auditor's website. If you have old affidavits, you need just to delete those and get rid of them because you will be required to use the current affidavit that is out there as of January. The affidavit is a sworn statement that's required by the legislative auditor. So again, you have to use our affidavit and do not make any adjustments to that affidavit. The affidavit is attesting that all the notice requirements prescribed by the open meetings law were met. The blanks to be completed on the affidavit are pertaining to your public meeting, and that information on the affidavit should correspond with the information on your notice of public meeting. The affidavit is attesting that those notices are attached in the millage documents. The name of the affidavit must be set forth in that affidavit, and the affidavit signature is required, and that affidavit must be signed in the presence of the notary. We have gotten several in the last year or so where the affidavits had been notarized without the affiant's signature. So actually, I'm not sure of the requirements of the notary of those statutes that govern the notaries, but I feel like that would be a violation. So you want to be sure that you are signing these affidavits in the presence of a notary before they are actually notarized. And then revised statute 3512 requires the notary to type, stamp, or print his or her name as commissioned with the Secretary of State's office. That is required by statute. I know that sometimes y'all get questions about why am I having to do this? I don't do this on any other document. Well, revised statute 3512 requires that they should be doing it on all documentation. And so then you have your notary, your documents notarized, and you want to be sure that they're in good standing with the Secretary of State's office. So on page 18, it gives you step-by-step how to go out to the Secretary of State's website and pull the notary data sheet. You're going to confirm that the notary did, in fact, type, print, or stamp their name as commissioned. You're going to confirm that the bar roll number, if they're an attorney, or the notary ID number is in active status. You want to be sure that the notary is active status on the Secretary of State's website. If they are anything else other than active, you need to find another notary. And then while you're out there, you might as well just print and attach a copy of that notary data sheet to your documents so that when we get it, we'll know that the notary was in good standing whenever they notarized that affidavit. So that's it for not rolling forward. You just have to follow the open meetings law. Now, we're going to show you, I'm not sure how well you can see them, maybe pretty well if you have a screen, but this is some sample documents of a not rolling forward situation last year. This is Iota Fire Protection District of Acadia Parish. They posted this agenda on July the 1st at 6 p.m. Their public meeting wasn't held until July the 11th at 6 p.m. So they gave plenty enough time, plenty enough notice of when their millage adoption was going to take place. Now, we know that July the 4th falls in there, which is a legal holiday, but they gave so much notice that really was not an issue when posting this agenda. And then under old business, they have the word none, so that it's clear that they're not going to take up any other old business. And then under new business, you see item number 1 says adopt the 2022 Iota Fire Protection District millage rate. So they met the requirement. They included the action verb, and they went forward with their public meeting. The next slide is their resolution. You can see they have 2 millage rates. The vote count was the same, and so they adopted them both by one resolution. They recorded it by one resolution. In the certificate statement, that adoption date is the same that was on their notice of public meeting, and then they had an authorized signer sign that resolution. The next slide is the affidavit. Now, this is an old affidavit. It's not the current affidavit, so don't see this slide and think, oh, well, I have that affidavit. This is an old one. You do need to go out and get the current affidavit off of the legislative auditor's website. But the affiant, Ralph Lacombe, he put his name at the top, and at the bottom, he signed his name. He signed that in front of the notary. And in this case, the notary was the clerk of court. The clerk of courts do have the authority to notarize documents, and they're also on the Secretary of State's website. At that top paragraph, he marked was posted. You can choose that if you posted your agenda or if you published your agenda. In this case, they posted it, which that's what most taxing districts actually do, is post their full meeting agenda. It's just something that's easier to control than would be in the newspaper. The next paragraph starts out that a quorum or simple majority of the total membership was physically present and voting. This date, time, and place should coordinate with the information that's on the notice of public meeting. So then again, the notary, the affiant signed it in presence of the notary, and then they went to the Secretary of State's website to double check that the notary was in good standing. And you can see that there is a notary ID number And if you go down a little bit, you'll see the status says active. So their notary was active at the time that the affidavit was signed. All right, I see we have a few questions coming in. So before we move on to the roll forward, we'll take a break and answer those questions. All right, let's see. So there's a question that says, for open meetings law requirements that excludes weekends and legal holidays, does legal holidays reference federal, state, and or local holidays? If I'm not mistaken, it says state holidays, but we will get Patrick to come double check that for us. I believe it's state holidays, but again, Patrick being the expert on that, we'll have him come back and double check that. And the next question is, what is a notary data sheet? Well, it's on your screen now. That's what the notary data sheet looks like. And again, you can go to the Secretary of State's office to pull that up, and you might as well print it while you're out there. The next question is, if you have a board vacancy, are they recorded in some way on the vote tally? That's a good question. Very good question. That just came up last week on one of the taxing districts gave me a call about this same question. Yes, I would encourage you to count that vote. What I told the person that called last week is the resolutions and ordinances that are on our website are out there in Word form. And so I suggested that they add vacant to the voting options. So it would say yays, nays, absent, abstained, and vacant. And then they could record that vacancy there. You know, they could put one as a vacancy. So that way we'll know that all of the seats of the taxing authority have been accounted for. All right, those are some great questions. Thank you. So the next thing we're going to go over is the rolling forward. So when you roll forward, you want to remember that you will be increasing taxes when you roll forward. And Article 7, Section 23C of the state constitution gives you that authority to do that. So when you roll forward, you only can roll forward when there is an increase in property value. Reassessment has adjusted your millage rate down. So the adjusted maximum millage rate has gone down when there is an increase in property value to generate the same revenue as the prior year. There we go. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties ourselves. I apologize if you lost our PowerPoint. I'm not sure what happened there. So anyway, so reassessment occurs and adjusts the millage rates downward to generate the same revenue as the prior year. And then Article 7, Section 23C of the Louisiana Constitution gives taxing districts the authority to roll forward to any rate over that adjusted maximum millage up to the prior year's maximum, which we also know is the maximum authorized millage rate. Again, this is only available when there is an increase in property value. So whenever you roll forward, a public hearing is required and a public meeting is required. You are required to have both. Typically, the public hearing is on the same date as the public meeting, just immediately before it. You know, sometimes people give 30 minutes, sometimes people give 45 minutes for that public hearing, but typically they are on the same date, around the same time. The public hearing is always immediately before the public meeting. When you roll forward, the laws that you're going to follow are Article 7, Section 23C, which provides some of the notice requirements, Revised Statute 47-1705B, which provides more notice requirements, and you still have to follow the open meetings law. So Article 7, Section 23C of the state constitution requires 2 separate publications no less than 30 days before the public hearing. So don't get your hearing confused with your meeting. You may want to underline that word in your setting millage rates book. 2 separate publications are required no less than 30 days before the public hearing. These publications shall include, but they're not limited to, they shall include date, time, place, and subject matter of the public hearing. Right now, we're talking about the hearing. Publications shall be published on 2 separate days in the official journal and in another newspaper with a larger circulation if there is one. The legislative auditor does not know the circulation numbers of your papers. It is up to you, the taxing district, to check the circulations if there is another paper within your jurisdiction. So you know you always have to publish in your official journal. And if there is a paper with a larger circulation than your official journal, you also have to publish in that paper. Revised Statute 47-1705B states that public hearings will be held in accordance with the Open Meetings Law. So we learned earlier that the Open Meetings Law requires that you post or publish your full meeting agenda as notice. So now what Revised Statute 47-1705B is saying, you must also post or publish an agenda for your public hearing. 47-1705B also requires additional notices whenever the millage rates are going to increase, except for all parishes. It applies to all parishes except for Rapides Parish. I'm not sure why Rapides was exempted out. Their legislator at the time, he went before the committee and then on to the full legislature, and they approved exempting Rapides Parish. Your publication shall contain a statement that the tax recipient body intends to consider levying additional or increased millage rates without further voter approval. You have to include that statement in your publications without further voter approval. Revised Statute 47B also requires that the publications be published on 2 separate days in the official journal and in a newspaper with a larger circulation if there is one. It goes on to say that the second publication in the official journal and in the paper with a larger circulation has to have at least 30 days from the second publication or from the last publication to the public hearing. We suggest that you allow more than 30 days before the public hearing to publish these ads, because there is no exceptions in the law if there is a mistake in the ad. You have to have it right. You have to check your ads and give yourself time to go out and check them before your public hearing, no less than 30 days before that public hearing. So you want to give yourself plenty enough time to check your ads as they are published, as they actually come out in the paper, and rerun them if necessary, if there's been an error in there. Unfortunately, even if it's the error of the newspaper, your publication still would not pass the certification process. We've seen publications that are, run 60 days out or 70 days out. There is no maximum number of days, only the minimum of 30 days before the publication. Excuse me. Okay, I apologize for that. I got a little frog in my throat. So moving on, again, you do want to give yourself more than 30 days to run those ads, so you'll have time to check them. Then moving on page 19 of your book, your publications, the requirements for your publications, there are specific formatting requirements provided for these publications. They must be placed in a prominent section of the newspaper. Placement of these ads cannot run in the classified section or the public notice section. So with those 2 steps right there, it's up to you to decide where to place these ads, as long as it is not in the classifieds and not in the public notice section. We've seen them in sports, we've seen them in the main section of the paper, we've seen them all over the paper, whatever you think is prominent, except it cannot be in the classifieds or the public notice sections. Your ads must be formatted in a box with a bolded outline. They must be a size of not less than 2 inches by 4 inches. We've seen them bigger than that, 5 by 7 or, 4 by 6. whatever, but it cannot be any smaller than 2x4. Your ads must be printed in a box with boldface type. So you want to be careful whenever you're running these ads. That's something else you will need to check other than the language in the ads. You also need to check the formatting of the ad. One thing you want to be sure of is that your public hearing and public meeting locations are consistent throughout the process. You cannot change from your advertised location in your ad, your 2x4 ad, to your posting agenda. Your location must be consistent from day one through the process. You can't change that. You can't switch locations in midstream. On page 20, publication charges by the official journal shall not be in excess of charges for regular commercial advertising. The legislative auditor does not know what those charges are, what those advertising charges are. That's for you, the taxing district, to find that out and work it out with the newspaper. Failure to timely publish renders the millage null, void, and of no effect. So that is written in law, but it kind of worries people sometimes when reading that. They feel like they're not going to get any revenue. And what happens is if your publications or your roll forward documents are deemed not satisfactory to meeting the requirements of the law. One thing is we cannot certify the increased millage rate. We would revert back to that adjusted maximum millage rate to ensure that you still get the same revenue as the prior year. You just would not get the increased revenue. On page 20, there's a sample publication. Again, this is a sample. Feel free to develop your own publications, but just sure that they do include all of the requirements that are set by revised statute 47-1705B. Going on, in addition to your publications, as tax recipient body, you are required to provide the assessor the date, time, and place of your pending public hearing. The assessor must maintain a list of those public hearings within their parish, but the assessor can choose whether to publish those on his or her website. They do have to keep the list, but if they publish them on their website, that is up for them to decide. Then in addition to that, the tax recipient body shall issue press releases. So you have to do 2x4 ads, and you also have to issue press releases to newspapers with substantial distribution within your jurisdiction and to area broadcast media. Now, this is not a new requirement. This is something that has been in law pretty much since the beginning of the roll forward procedures. I have gotten several questions about the press releases lately. So I'm a little concerned that taxing districts are not aware of this. And if it's determined that the press releases were not done, that could cause your roll forward to fail, or could cause you some type of action against your public meeting and public hearing. So you do want to issue the press releases to area broadcast media and to newspapers with substantial distribution within your jurisdiction. Now, while you're required to do that, there's no requirement for the newspaper or the broadcast media to actually run the ad. So you, as a tax recipient body, I would suggest that you get some type of confirmation that you have issued these press releases and distributed them to the required people. That way, if there's any questions that come up, you will have documentation that you've met your requirement and that they just were not issued by the broadcast media or the newspapers. Then going on down, on the first day of publication occurring no less than 30 days before the public hearing, we're still talking about the public hearing, the tax recipient body must post a notice of public hearing on their internet website. So now you're going to have a notice of public hearing on your website and a notice of public meeting on your website. The internet posting shall remain active until action has been taken to approve or disapprove, or action has been abandoned on the proposed millage increase. So you have to leave those notices out on your website until you've actually taken a vote on the roll forward. The publications to consider levying additional or increased millage rates without further voter approval. So those are your roll forward ads. Those are those 2x4 ads. They must include an estimate of the amount of tax revenues to be collected in the next tax year from the increased millage as compared to the amount of revenue for the current year. And it also must include the amount of increase in taxes attributable to the increase. So now your 2x4 ads have to include dollar amounts. You have to include the total dollar amount that roll forward that you will generate, that you will get at the end of the year as compared to the amount that is only related to the increase. So your 2x4 ads now have to include those dollar amounts. We're still on page 21 of your setting millage rates book. Revised statute 47-1705.1. So this is the site with the population bracket. So again, if you have printed a book when they first came out in January, I need you to correct the population numbers. It should be between 245,000 and 265,000. So please make that correction in your setting millage rates book. And what that statute does, it requires public hearings in which a taxing authority of a non-elected board in a parish with a population between 245,000 and 265,000 plans to seek a millage increase. So that is a roll forward. So any parish that falls between that bracket, the non-elected boards must have their public hearings coordinated with the parish governing authority. It requires those non-elected boards to get in touch with the parish governing authority, who will have scheduled some dates for their public hearings and their public meetings. And that's where they will hold those. They still have to meet all the other requirements, but instead of giving notice of their normal location, they will give notice of the parish governing authority. Then going on down, you'll see the provisions for the subsequent meeting. So this is where we said you'll no longer follow the AG opinion because there are provisions for subsequent hearings and subsequent meetings in revised statute 47-1705B. If the public hearing to consider levying additional or increased millage is canceled or postponed, or if the proposal was considered at the public hearing without action or vote, you want to highlight that, without action or vote. In any future hearing to consider such proposal, you want to highlight that word proposal, shall be advertised and publicized as required by 47-1705B, except that the 2x4 ads do not have to be done again. So I had you highlight without action or vote. That's a very important term. So if you think that you are going to have a subsequent hearing or subsequent meeting, there cannot be any action or vote at all regarding the roll forward proposal. And the 19th JDC and the Court of Appeals have ruled that the roll forward proposal includes everything from the very beginning publication all the way to the final adoption. So that means there cannot be any action or vote in the roll forward until the final meeting. So again, if you expect that you're going to have to cancel or postpone your hearing, I suggest that you table the whole thing and keep documented minutes of that, keep a paper trail of that until your final adoption actually occurs. So you no longer, if you have a subsequent hearing or subsequent meeting, you no longer have to do the 2x4 ads, but you still have to do all the other requirements of 47-1705B. You have to provide the assessor with the new pending hearing date. The assessor has to add that date to the list. You have to issue the press release, another press release to newspapers with substantial distribution and to broadcast media. So you still have to do those things to notify the public of the subsequent hearing and subsequent meeting, but you do not have to run your 2x4 ads again. So in addition to revised statute 47-1705B and Article 7, Section 23C of the Louisiana Constitution, you still have to meet the requirements of the open meetings law. You still have to give written notice no less than 24 hours prior to that public hearing, excluding weekends and legal holidays, And you also have to give written notice no less than 24 hours, excluding weekends and holidays, prior to that public meeting. Patrick has already gone through a lot of the details that's shown on page 21. So we will skip over that and go to page 22 of your book. Written notice requirements for the public hearing. Again, written notice must be published twice in the official journal and twice in a paper with a larger circulation, no less than 30 days before the public hearing. And then it goes on to tell you what other notice requirements are there. You have to post or publish your full and complete agenda no less than 24 hours before the public meeting. You have to do those 2x4 ads. And the notice of public hearing, that full meeting agenda can be posted or published. The notice of public meeting, again, we've gone through all of that multiple times. So it's the written public notice, no less than 24 hours prior to your meeting, excluding weekends and legal holidays. And that should include your full meeting agenda. On page 23, your agenda must provide date, time, and place, list each item separately, and you can decide whether you post it or publish it. The additional agenda requirements for actually during your public meeting, we've gone over those as well. They're the same as whenever you're not rolling forward, as are the general notice requirements. The only thing I want to point out here again is that your millage adoption must always take place in the public meeting. So if you look under general notice requirements, the fourth or fifth bullet that states that as a reminder that your millage adoption must take place in a public meeting. So I encourage you to highlight that just so it's there as a reminder whenever you get ready to actually hold your public meeting. On page 24, it just points out some more of the reminders about the letterhead and giving the name and contact information for a purpose for them to contact if they have questions about the public meeting. So the next section we're going to go through are the actual documents that you're going to turn in when you are rolling forward. Okay, so remember, when you're rolling forward, you are required to have a public hearing and a public meeting. So you will turn in documents related to both of those. The documents you're going to turn in are the notice of public hearing, which includes the full hearing agenda. The notice of public meeting, again, includes the agenda. When you're rolling forward, you're going to submit 2 resolutions or 2 ordinances, an affidavit, and a notary data sheet. All of the other documentation you should keep in your files of your office. For example, the confirmation that you submitted the press release, you want to keep that in the files of your office. I also suggest that you keep copies of what you submit to the assessor. Now, if there's any questions and I need to call you, you'll have copies of those documents that we can review together. The requirements for the resolution or your ordinance, whatever you decide to use. Your first resolution or ordinance requires a simple majority vote of the members present. So remember, you have to have a quorum. The first resolution requires a simple majority vote of the members present. That first resolution will set forth and designate the adjusted maximum millage rate as determined by reassessment. Remember, that's the lower rate. That is the rate that will generate the same revenue as the prior year. So the first resolution will adopt the lower rate when you're rolling forward. The second resolution or ordinance requires 2/3 vote of the total membership. So that's very important. You might want to highlight that. The total membership does include vacant seats. So when you're rolling forward, it requires 2/3 vote in favor of the roll forward to roll forward. That second resolution or ordinance, it must set forth and designate the adjusted maximum millage rate, which is the same rate that you have on the first resolution, and the increased rate being levied for that tax year. So the increased rate will also be on the second resolution. And then all other millage rates that are not subject to the roll forward but are being levied, they can be levied on that roll forward resolution, or they can have a separate resolution. That's up to you how you want to do that. Both resolutions or ordinances must be signed by an authorized person. They must show the date of adoption, all things that we went over in the not rolling forward section as well. They must both reflect a complete vote count, yeas, nays, absent, and abstained. And main thing is, remember that second one has to have 2/3 vote of the total membership. The requirements for the affidavit, again, you must use the current affidavit that's on the legislative auditor's website. We have amended these, and they are provide information regarding some new procedures. So you must use the current affidavit. If you recall, normally prior to this year, whenever you were rolling forward, you had to actually submit the tear sheets from the newspaper when you were rolling forward. If you will look at the documents to be submitted to the assessor, the tear sheets are not listed there. You no longer have to submit the tear sheets when you're rolling forward. However, the affidavits have been updated and amended to include specific information about those tear sheets and those publications and the press releases. So you must use our current affidavit. Another thing I want to point out about those tear sheets, even though you don't have to submit the tear sheets, you still have to run the publications. And the Legislative Auditor's Office, we will be checking those randomly. Anytime we get a roll forward, the determination will be made at that time whether to call the taxing districts and have them send and submit the 2x4 tear sheets. So get those, keep them in your office, get the actual tear sheet, keep them in your office. And if we call you, you have to make them readily available for us. Getting back to the notice, to the requirements for the affidavit, again, you are required to use the current affidavit. It's a sworn statement by the legislative auditor. The affidavit is attesting that all the notice requirements were met. The blanks before the roll forward occurred, yes or no statement pertain to your public meeting. So just remember that. On the middle of the first page, there is a statement that says roll forward occurred, yes or no. The blanks before that, the paragraphs before that statement pertain to your public meeting. And then whenever you get to that statement, you're going to mark yes or no, depending on the action of your board. If your board voted in favor of the roll forward, if it received the 2/3 vote of the total membership, you're going to mark yes. But if you've done all the notice requirements and it's time for your board to vote and they vote no, they decide not to roll forward, you would mark no. So that just lets me know what the action was and how deep I have to look at your notices and your documents. Then going on, the affidavit is attesting that all requirements to roll forward were done by the taxing authority, that you've met the requirements of the Constitution, of the statutes, and the open meetings law. The name of the affidavit must be set forth. The affiant must sign the affidavit in front of the notary. Remember, don't let the notary notarize a blank affidavit. And then at the bottom of 26, again, it just repeats the steps on how to find the notary data sheet. So we went through that roll forward a little quick. So if you have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat box and we'll stop in a few minutes and take those. The next slide is a sample of a roll forward. This was done by the Concordia Parish Assessor's Office. They ran this ad in their official journal on March 9th for a public hearing being held on May 2nd. So they gave themselves plenty enough time to go out there and check these ads. In the ad, they advertised a public hearing by the assessment district. They gave the date, time, and place. And then they included that statement to consider levying additional or increased taxes without further voter approval. And then they also included those dollar amounts. The Legislative Auditor's Office cannot calculate those dollar amounts for you simply because we don't know the property values at the time. We don't know all the figures needed to create those. Now we can kind of guide you through the steps, but actually creating them, the taxing districts will have to do that themselves. Their next publication was done on March the 16th. Again, their public hearing was in May. So again, they're giving themselves plenty enough time to check these ads before that 30 days has come and gone. The next slide is their posted notice. They did post their full agendas. They posted this notice on April the 28th, and their public hearing was on May 2nd at 10 a.m. at the courthouse, and they gave an agenda item for their public hearing to hear public comments regarding the adoption of the increased millage rate. Now, most people will put to hear public comments regarding the roll forward and increased millage rate. They'll make it a little bit more specific than that, but this gave the reader enough information that millage rates and taxes were going to be increased. They adjourned the public hearing, and then underneath that, you can see a public meeting will be held as follows. The public meeting was May 2nd at 10:05 at the courthouse. Now, the assessor only gave 5 minutes for their public hearing because the assessor is a one-person office, and generally, typically, they don't have anyone there to comment. However, larger taxing districts like the parish council or a school board, they may want to allow a little bit more time than that. Typically 30 minutes is about allowed for that. Under old business, you can see they wrote the word none, which provided information to the reader that they were not going to take up anything else. And then under new business, they have item number 1, adopt the adjusted millage rate. So that corresponds with that first resolution. It adopts the lower rate to generate the same revenue as the prior year. Under new business, item number 2, set forth the adjusted millage rate and roll forward to millage rates not exceeding the maximum authorized rate. So item number 2 adopts resolution number 2. You have to set forth that adjusted maximum millage rate, and then you also have to adopt the increased rate. So those agenda items correspond with the resolutions. The next slide is the resolution. Now, they did use our sample resolutions. You're not required to, but they are out there for you to use. Resolution number 2, you can see, adopts 2 rates, the adjusted millage rate in the middle, and then the increased rate, the levied rate to the right. That's going to be the rate that actually goes on the tax roll. Then resolution number 1, that's the first resolution. And you can see that that rate corresponds with the same rate as the adjusted rate on the resolution number 2. The next slide is the affidavit. Now, again, this is an old affidavit from last year. The affidavits have been amended, and you are required to use the current affidavit this year. And then this is the second page of the affidavit. You can see the assessor, she signed it in front of the notary. And then this is the notary data sheet. Again, they use the clerk of court. You're not required to use the clerk of court. That just so happens that that is the 2 documents that we picked up to include in the presentation. Okay, I think we have some questions in, so we'll stop and take those questions real quick. Okay, here's a question that says, the 30 days prior to public hearing does not take into account holidays, weekends, etc. Correct. It does take into, you do not have to exclude holidays, weekends for the 2x4 advertisements. The excluding weekends and legal holidays is a provision of the open meetings law. The 2x4 ads are a provision of revised statute 47-1705B and Article 7, Section 23 of the Constitution. So whenever you're counting the number of days, it is okay to include holidays, weekends, and those things when you're going to publish those 2x4 ads. The next question is, if a justice of the peace is used for a notary but is not listed on the Secretary of State's website, is that acceptable? Yes, you can use justices of the peace, and they are listed on the Secretary of State's website under elected officials. So you'd go to the same website and you would go to the elections division, and they have a spot that says find elected officials, and you would just find that there. But if not, if you have a hard time, you can give me a call and we can find it together, or just shoot me an email and I can make sure that I pull that for you. The next question is regarding roll forward. The first sentence on page 19, roll forward occurs only when an increase in property value adjusts millage rates downward. Does the increase in property values refer to the estimated value provided by the assessor? How does the increase adjust millage rates downward? Okay, that's a couple of very good questions. So you have to look at it kind of like a balancing scale. Look at reassessment and the adjustment of millage rates kind of like a balancing scale. Again, the purpose of reassessment is to ensure the taxing districts the same revenue as the prior year. And so that means either adjusting them upward or downward, depending on those property values. So if there is an increase in property value, the millage rate is going to go down so that the taxing district will get the same revenue as the prior year. And that's what invokes the roll forward procedures. However, if there is a decrease in property value, your millage rate will go higher, again, to ensure the taxing district the same revenue as the prior year. So the other question is, does the increase in values refer to the estimated value approved by the assessor? In case of your documentation of running your ads, yes, it could do that, but that is not we're not going to use the estimated value to adjust the millage rates. Typically, before the assessor has his final numbers, they can tell you whether they're expecting an increase in property values at reassessment or a decrease in property values. And if they are expecting an increase in property values, they can give you like a percentage of how much they expect it to increase. And that would be an estimated value for you to start running your 2x4 ads if you expect to roll forward. However, the millage rates are adjusted based off of the actual property values, the actual reassessed property values. Then there's another question that says, when mathematically calculating the 2/3 vote, 2/3 is mathematically 0.67. If we have 3/5, which is 60, will that still constitute a pass or fail? That would cause your roll forward to fail because you have to have 2/3 vote. So you have to have 4 out of 5. You cannot have half of a person. So if you have a 5-member board, you would have to have 4 out of 5 to pass that roll forward. And if you didn't, we would just revert back to the adjusted maximum millage as shown on resolution number 1. Okay, all very good questions, very good questions. So the next thing we're going to go over is the different types of ad valorem taxes. You're probably already familiar with most of these. We're just going to go over them as a review. There are 3 different types of ad valorem taxes: constitutional, statutory, and voter approved. The constitutional taxes are provided by the state constitution. Generally, they're for school boards, parish councils, law enforcement agencies, that type of thing. Municipalities, for example, Article 6, Section 27A authorizes a municipality to levy 7 mills for general purposes. But one thing I want you to keep in mind, even though the Constitution originally authorized these rates, they are subject to reassessment, just like voter approved taxes are. So even though a municipality was authorized originally at 7 mills, it probably is not at 7 mills now. Depending on the results of reassessment, that millage rate could either go up or down, depending on if it was an increase or a decrease in property value at reassessment. Article 6, Section 26A is a statutory millage, and those are millage rates provided by the statutes. But usually they have some other type of, Article 7 that's the Constitution. But the statutory millages, I'm getting ahead of myself, the statutory millages, again, they're authorized by the statutes, and they generally have some type of provision to go with them. For example, there's one out there for juvenile justice systems that says they can only levy a specific millage for a certain number of years. There's another one out there that says you can levy this millage for the assessor's office after you create an assessment district. Just because you have an assessor does not mean you have an assessment district. And so the statutes provide, if you create an assessment district, we will allow you to levy a millage. it's the responsibility of the taxing districts. If you have something going through the session, which we've already said it's going on right now, if you have something going through the statutes that would allow you to collect a millage under that statute, you need to be keeping an eye on that and notify us of that. That's not something that we will monitor for you. Then voter approved taxes. I mean, we all know what they are. They're taxes that have been put before the voters and approved or not approved. The millage rates that are authorized by a majority of the electors, that's the voter approved taxes. The State Bond Commission and the Secretary of State's office has the authority to approve the propositions that go before the voters. That's not something the legislative auditor does. We don't get involved until after the tax has actually been approved by the voters, or if it fails, we don't have anything to do with that. Okay. The proposition, they generally contain the millage rate to be levied, the purpose of that tax, the term of that tax, and the beginning date, and typically a recitation of the taxes expected to be collected in that first year. Although propositions being levied for bonds, they will not have a specific millage rate because that's up to you, the taxing district, to calculate that rate and levy it according to your budget needs. Also on, you'll see the next thing we're going to go over are the maximum millage reports. Now, these are reports that are available on our website that show every millage in the state. They're broken down by parish and by municipality. It's available to you to go out there and look at it, and it's also available on the assessor secured site. The one that's on the legislative auditor's public page is not a updating report. Once we put them out there, it's out there. The one that's on the assessor secured site is an updating report. It's connected to the database, and as something is changed in the database, that maximum millage report on the assessor secured site will also change. One thing you want to remember is these reports are strictly to be used for informational purposes. It's up to you, the taxing district, to maintain those records of ad valorem taxes and the rates being levied toward them. At reassessment, you'll get new rates, and so you can keep those from year to year as to what rates are available to you in what year. The next slide you'll see is a sample of a maximum millage report. This is for Beauregard Parish. Every parish in the state has a maximum millage report. This is just one that we chose for the presentation today. The maximum millage report, it provides information such as the millage key number, which every tax and every ad valorem tax in the state has a millage key, and those are assigned by our database. It provides the tax description of that individual tax. It provides the purpose code. Now, there is a legend on our website as well that gives you the definitions of those codes. It provides the type of tax. If you see a C, that means it's a constitutional tax. If you see a V, that means it's a voter approved tax. If you see an L, that means it's a statutory tax that was approved by the legislature. Under authorized rate column, now this is important. You want to understand that that authorized rate column on the maximum millage report is the original authorization. That's not what the tax is at now. That is the original authorization that was either in the proposition or in the Constitution or the statutes. The number of years, it tells you the number of years that was written in the proposition. It tells you the first year that it was levied, and it tells you what year it will expire in. And then it goes on to show you the expiration date, the election date, excuse me. And then if there is an X marked under parish-wide, that means it is a parish-wide tax or a municipal-wide tax. So if there's an X mark there, it tells you that it covers the whole parish or either the whole municipality. The next column shows you the last year that a tax went through reassessment. It shows you the year that the tax was rolled forward. And then it gets to the slot years. You'll see there are 2 slot years for each tax. The 2022 slot years tells you what they levied, that last column, in 2022. And the 2023 slot year tells you what their options are for this year. They can levy any rate up to that adjusted max meal column or roll forward to any rate up to that max meal column. So some of the taxes in Beauregard Parish have not been rolled forward. They're not required to roll forward. That's a decision for the taxing district to decide if they do. So, again, you can look at that and see that there is a difference in the levied column and the maximum millage column. So that right there is a clue that they have not rolled forward. The next slide, if you'll look at these numbers, these millage key numbers, you'll see that some of them begin with a number 1. Those are parish taxes. And then at the bottom of this slide, you'll see that some of the millage keys begin with a number 5. Those are municipal taxes. You read it the same way. It's just some apply to the parish millage rates and some apply to the municipal millage rates. This next slide is an example of a record for a general obligation bond. This is just there to show you how a general obligation bond millage should be changing, how it should be fluctuating. We don't think that they should always be going down. Sometimes there's cases where the millage rate has to go up, but we should not see a millage rate that is the same for 5, 6, 7 years because property values will have changed within that term. So you need to be sure that you're going out there and recalculating these millage rates being applied to the bonds to only meet the debt for 1 year. Now, you won't ever get it exactly to the penny. Sometimes you may collect more, sometimes you may collect less, but we do expect you to have it, fairly reasonable so that you're not over collecting or under collecting, because that may cause you some issues toward the end of the bond. So you want to be sure that you're calculating the bond rate as you go along. This is just another screenshot of a bond that's in Calcasieu Parish. Same thing, it fluctuated back and forth, started out low and then it went a little higher and now they're beginning to drop it back down. This next slide just tells you access to information that's available on the Legislative Auditor's website. We do have a new website. It's very exciting. You probably saw it when you went to register for today's workshop. But if you have any issues with it, please feel free to call me. I don't mind helping you find things on there. At the top of the slide, on page 29 of your book, it tells you how to get to the assessors and millages page, which has everything we've talked about today. It has the setting millage rates book. Sometime in the next week or so, we're actually going to post this webinar, this workshop, to the assessors and millages page. So if you know anybody that's missed today's workshop, you can tell them that it's not too late. They can go out there and view it online. Some information that's available on the assessors and millages page. There are some FAQs, which I'm excited to tell you we have just updated this week. So they're very informative. The way that they are formatted, it's easy to find your question and the answer that you're looking for. So they are under FAQs tax review. So they are out there on our website right now. You'll also find information about those pension fund reports we told you, the maximum millage reports, the sample forms, the required affidavit, and then also there's some educational material out there for you as well. This is just a screenshot of our new website. This is what the assessors and millages page looks like. Again, you probably saw it when you went to register for the millage workshop, but the information regarding the setting millage rates book, the FAQs, all of that stuff will be listed under that resources button. You would click read more and it would take you to another page that provided all the sample forms, the required forms, again, the tax review FAQs, and then there's also a link to the legal division's FAQs. And those FAQs provide just extensive information. They have information on the open meetings law, on public records, on public bid. I mean, anything you can think of, they probably have an FAQ out there on our website. But again, if you go to the assessors and millages page and click resources, it would take you to the page to find all that information. Now, this is our legal assistance page. This is where our legal division has their stuff. Again, you see legal FAQs. And if you go here, the tax review FAQs are linked here. And then it has a place for you to submit actual questions to one of the attorneys. And then they provide like a little legal minute on certain topics. They like to put little topics out there. Now, this last slide is just contact information on how to get in touch with me. Feel free to reach out and email me or call me. I'm in the office Monday through Thursday. And then on Fridays, I telecommute, but I still am getting emails from there. I still am working and responding to your emails on Fridays. But feel free to reach out and contact me if you have any questions, or even if you have any other questions for the office, I can try to get you in touch with that person and we can surely try to help you out. Again, if you need confirmation that you participated in today's webinar, reach out to me. Send me an email to be sure I have your correct email address, and I can reply back to you with confirming your attendance. We have a couple more questions before we wrap things up. One question says, if you just rolling forward, do you have to have a public hearing? Yes, a public hearing is always required when you are rolling forward. It is not required whenever you are not rolling forward. So the answer to your question is yes, a public hearing is required when you are rolling forward. The next question is, oh, well, thank you for that nice comment. I appreciate that very much. I'm here to help you out, and I really do not mind getting the phone calls. I enjoy talking to y'all and getting to know you all a little bit. So thank you for that comment. I appreciate that. And then the question for the open meetings law requirements that exclude weekends and legal holidays. Does legal holidays reference federal, state, and or local holidays? Well, Patrick has not made his way back over here. So if you will send me an email, I will certainly confirm that for you. But I really think it's state holidays. But if you will send me an email, I would definitely confirm that information with Patrick. All right. Are there any other questions before we go? Well, look, I do appreciate all of you participating today. That is not lost on me that you have given up your time to come here and, to listen to this and to kind of learn a little bit more about the tax review process. I hope it helps you and provides the information that you need. And again, feel free to reach out to me regarding the tax review process or legal. I can certainly get you in touch with those attorneys as well. Thank you all so much and have a good day.